At the outset, I would like to thank the scientific committee for giving me this opportunity. My topic will be on approach to a case of sudden onset diplopia. Acute onset diplopia represents 0.1% of all the presenting complaints to the emergency room. One needs to recognize it and differentiate it from the benign cause as simple as could be a refractive error, any aberrations that can cause diplopia, from a life-threatening etiology like an aneurysm or a space-occupying lesion. So when you have a patient who presents to the department or to the emergency room with sudden onset of diplopia, the first thing to differentiate is it a monocular or is it a binocular diplopia? So it is as simple, just cover one eye or ask the patient how it is. When they cover one eye, does the diplopia disappear or does it still persist? So if they mean that the diplopia persists, then you are looking into a case of a patient who is presenting with a monocular diplopia. So a simple test to rule out the most common refractive aberration is to do a pinhole test. So refractive aberrations and other detailed slit lamp examination will reveal us the reason why the patient should have a monocular diplopia, starting from corneal problems of irregular cornea, the lens related, or a macular pathology. So when a patient has binocular diplopia, after proceeding to the cover test and measuring a prism cover test, we'll be able to quantify the strabismus and differentiate it from an comitant from an incomitant strabismus. So the most common type among the comitant strabismus, which my previous speaker has spoken about, like esotropias, decompensated phorias, accommodative ETs, are the more common comitant one, where the primary and the secondary deviation with either eye fixing remains the same. Incomitant deviation, mostly cranial nerve palsies. So when one is at a doubt, can proceed with the force suction test, where you can differentiate if the FTD is positive, you're looking at a patient who has a restrictive strabismus. If the FTD is negative, you're looking at a patient who has a paralytic strabismus. If there is a history of varying symptoms and varying duration, and the deviation also keeps changing when we are measuring, there is ptosis, then we are looking at a neuromuscular junction-related pathology, could be a myasthenia. By doing a tensilon test, one will be able to differentiate it whether it is myasthenia. The rest are rare, so I haven't covered them. So these are the more common ones, and if you've taken a stepwise decision, then you'll be able to fix in what the etiology, possible etiology you're dealing with for the patient. So always follow a stepwise pattern when we're evaluating the patient. History is a more pertinent one. So detailed history about the onset, progression, whether it is intermittent or constant, for us to deal with, whether it is related to a constant pathology of a paralytic strabismus or intermittently changing intermittent exotropia, decompensating phorias, or intermittent symptoms for a myasthenia. Does the patient complain of any varying diplopia with his head position or the gaze change, whether the diplopia becomes better at certain positions, whether there are previous histories, associated neurological complaints, headache, vomiting, then you're looking at something more than an usual one. So you need to be more aware of the neurological symptoms, any history of pain. So onset wise, if it is a sudden onset or at any age, could be dealing with a paralytic, and if it is gradual and it is present from the childhood, it could be a non-paralytic kind of a symptom. Always go in and review the symptoms, whether other cranial nerves of 2nd, 5th, 7th, 8th, and 9th are involved. So more than one cranial nerve, again, we're dealing with something more than a monocranial nerve palsy, like microvascular related reasons, or are we dealing with any other lesions that is causing space occupying or any neurology. So by knowing the multiple cranial nerves, one will be able to localize where the possible lesion could be. The history about diabetic vascular disease, hypertension in an older patient, then we are dealing with a microvascular problem. History of trauma with the difficulty in looking down gaze, then it could be a traumatic fourth nerve. History of muscle fatigueness for myasthenia. History of palpitation, heat sensitivity, weight loss, then we are dealing with the patient probably because of thyroid dysfunction. Any brainstem symptoms focusing to ischemic stroke like vertigo, aphasia, ataxia, dysphagia. If there is difficulty in bowel bladder, maybe we are dealing with the patient. We need to look into other things and evaluate for multiple sclerosis. Medical history, medications, drugs induced should be taken into consideration. Examination, coming on to the oculomotor, do a thorough external evaluation starting from the abnormal head posture. Is there any AHPs, face turn, chin lift, head tilt? Is there any ptosis Is it a pseudo or a true ptosis or complete ptosis? Or is there any facial asymmetry along with it, any extraocular motility limitation along with the ptosis? How is the globe? Is there a prominence of globe, exophthalmic appearance? Then moving on to the motor evaluation, do a cover test which will help us to reveal any decompensated folius, latent strabismus, to see for the variation in the movement to differentiate from a primary and a secondary deviation. Do a cover uncover test, prism cover test, and quantify the deviation. Do an extraocular movements and see for which all gaze the limitation and where is the overaction of the muscles. Especially whenever there is a doubt and vision is equal, do a right fixing and left fixing so that we will be able to differentiate a primary and secondary deviation. Parkes 3 steps specifically in hypertropias to differentiate what could be and localize a vertical recti or an oblique that is involved. So we, based on which gaze it is increasing, which head tilt it is increasing, which eye is hypertropic, one will be able to localize most of the times if it is a typical oblique or a typical vertical recti being presenting as a mononuclear. Double Maddox rod often helps us in patients who very clearly mention that they have a tilt. So clearly ask them about the positioning of the tilt by comparing it to the side of a door or a window, how the position of the edge appears. Many times by doing a double Maddox rod, one will be able to pick up whether it is a unilateral fourth nerve or a bilateral fourth nerve and quantify the torsion, how we want to manage it. Diplopia head-starting definitely plays a role in a patient with diplopia for us to make out where the gaze of maximum separation is. Always remember that the maximum separation of the two images will be the gaze where the two muscles are acting, and based on whether it is crossed or uncrossed, and based on the position of the second image, one will be able to specify which muscle, specifically denote which muscle is palsied. So the position of the image is the reversal of the position of the eye, and the distal image in vertical deviation always belongs to the paretic eye. His chart helps us for a proper documentation, also helps us to quantify the deviations, look for torsion. Definitely his chart evaluation and documenting in the first visit. When they come for the subsequent visits and documenting it will help us to see whether there is any resolution. His chart definitely will help us in picking up any small paresis. Also, if we don't see any obvious extraocular motility limitation, his chart would help us to pick up any paresis. Coming on to sensory evaluation, Berth 4 dot is a standard method. Helps us to clearly denote whether it is crossed, uncrossed, vertical, horizontal diplopia that we're dealing with. Begolini's glass will help us to differentiate whether it is we are dealing with any retinal correspondence ARC, whether we are having the patient with scotomas, suppression scotomas. So to recollect, paralytic strabismus, definitely secondary deviation will be more than the primary, and in non-paralytic, secondary and primary will be the same. And ocular motility will be limited with paralytic, non-paralytic ocular motility will be full. So specific tests, force suction tests could be done as an outpatient department in your office also. Plus, just before you start any surgeries, it is mandatory for a person to do a force suction test. So in a patient in an outpatient department, so after application of topical anesthetic medication, use a forceps, atraumatic forceps, hold the conjunctiva. So grasp the globe and push the globe towards the direction where there is limitation of the movement. So if a person succeeds in moving the eye in the direction of limitation, that means the FTT is negative. That means there is no restriction on the opposite side. If the person is not able to move the eye in the direction of limitation, then force suction test is positive. That means we are dealing with a restrictive pathology. Similarly, on table, we can perform a exaggerated force suction, oblique traction for the obliques as well to quantify any laxity of the tendon. So force generation is the point beyond which the person can move. This is the patient, it is not the voluntary movement by the examiner, it is the direction the patient has to move beyond the direction where the extraocular motility limitation is present. It can be quantified as well. So to remember, FTT negative means the eye can be moved further. So we are dealing with the patient with palsy or paresis. If FTT is positive, that means we are not able to move the eye further. We are dealing with a restriction pathology. Of course, visual acuity estimation and documentation is very essential. because multiple cranial nerve palsy, sometimes you'll be dealing with a patient who has second nerve also involved. So quantifying and regular visits quantifying the vision is mandatory. Looking at the pupil is also plays a major role, especially in third cranial nerve palsies, where pupillary involvement and non-pupillary involvement, the management and the investigations would differ. So fundus examination, one should have look in for other fundus pathology which can result in double vision. Also look for the torsion of, to see for any pre-existing excyclotorsion, specifically when we are dealing with a patient with a fourth cranial nerve palsies. So do a thorough general and a neurological evaluation whenever required. Always take in a consult from a neurologist or a dietitian, endocrinologist whenever you have doubt in, and systemic evaluation whenever it is required. Other ancillary tests would involve, as I told in the first slides, about tensilon test, hydrophonium injections, or testing for myasthenia, or sending for antibodies for cholinesterase. Doing a thyroid function test, T3, T4, TSH. In case of suspecting myasthenia, do a repeat nerve stimulation or EMG. Whenever we're dealing with a patient more than 60 years of age and you're suspecting arthritic end, do a detailed blood investigations, complete blood counts, C-reactive protein in ESR. We're thinking of a giant cell arthritis. Often we are left with the decision making whether this patient has to be imaged or can we wait and watch. So unenhanced plain CT is not useful for us to come to any conclusion. MRI is usually preferable in any case for oculomotor nerve palsies. For any patient who are dealing with an acute isolated third nerve palsy, should be imaged with CT and CT angiography whenever you are suspecting a compressive aneurysm, because the most common posterior communicating artery and the junction with the internal carotid artery is the most common site where the aneurysm patient can be presenting with an acute isolated third nerve palsy, pupil involving. When you're suspecting orbital apex syndrome or retroorbital mass, thyroid related or orbital trauma, plan a contrast enhanced CT imaging for the brain and the orbit. When you're suspecting cavernous sinus thrombosis, preferable is to do a CT and a CT venogram. Young patients, non-traumatic, nil systemic illness, when they present with double vision, they're suspecting much beyond the monocranial nerve palsies, go in for an MRI with contrast. Children with bilateral presentations of cranial nerve palsies or acute or recurrent, whenever suspicious symptoms are there, neurological pictures are there, go in for an MRI with contrast, do not delay. So to recap, differentiate from mononuclear to monoocular diplopia to binocular diplopia. When you have neurological symptoms, have a neurologist consult, go in for imaging. Isolated palsies, do a detailed orthoptic evaluation, differentiate which cranial nerve or multiple cranial nerve and decide on the imaging. When you have an older patient, decide in and go for blood investigations to see for giant cell arthritis. The most common neurological, congenital, traumatic, and ischemic, and most common myogenic origin could be myasthenia and orbital thyroid-related myopathies. So I'll just discuss few cases. My first case is a 45-year-old lady who presented with squinting of her right eye with binocular diplopia for last 1 week. She was diabetic and hypertensive, and her blood sugar showed an uncontrolled sugar levels. We could see in figure 1 that there is abduction limitation of the right eye grading to -3. Deviation measured with prism covered test could be quantified with the left eye fixing of 30 prisms, which is the primary, and right eye fixing of 50 prisms, the secondary deviation. So secondary is more than the primary deviation. Her diplopia chart showed maximum separation in the dextro version, and it was an uncrossed image, and S chart showed a limitation of movements corresponding to the right lateral rectus. So it is a right sixth nerve palsy. So most commonly in adults, vasculopathies, trauma, and CNS lesions. Children, it is neoplasm. So need to differentiate. If for pediatric, we can follow up if it's a isolated lesion. Adults, you need to differentiate. If they are younger patients, go in for evaluation. Older patients, if they're non-resolving, evaluate. For bilateral, do an evaluation in pediatric and do a detailed evaluation in adults. I'm skipping the management. My second case is a lady who presented with ptosis, sudden onset, and she had an RTA 3 years ago. She had, in primary gaze, she had an exotropia with hypotropia. All the gaze, she had limitation of movement except the right eye abduction was present. So his chart showed limitation, and the smaller field belonged to the right eye, and diplopia chart showed maximum separation in all the gaze except the dextro version. So this is the right third nerve palsy. Remember, surgical management of right third nerve palsy is very challenging, and always remember not to operate more than three extraocular muscles at a time because of the problem of anterior segment ischemia. Third case, I'll go in briefly. That patient had 24-year-old male had diplopia following RTA. After 8 months, he was presenting to us. He had a right eye hypertropia and right eye overaction. He had hypertropia of the right eye, increasing in the dextroversion and increasing in the left head tilt. Also, his diplopia chart showed maximum separation in the dextrodepression. His chart showed limitation of movement corresponding to the left eye superior oblique and overaction of the right eye. So it is a straightforward left superior oblique palsy. So always remember, in older patients, whenever they present with diplopia of recent onset, always keep congenital fourth nerve palsies in mind, because it can be rare, but decompensated fourth nerve palsies can present. Any history of trauma, always think about fourth nerve palsy, traumatic in origin. And if there is a long-standing torticollis, always think about congenital fourth nerve palsy, which could have decompensated. To conclude, remember the red flags. Whenever more than one cranial nerve deficit is present, if the pupils are involved, if we are dealing with a patient with the neurological symptoms, patient has pain with the diplopia, proptosis, always remember to take in proper detailed evaluation. Don't hesitate to take in a neurologist consult and plan in imaging whenever required, because a proper decision and proper planning of investigations can save a life, can and help us to diagnose life-threatening problems, specifically the neurological issues.